who will be this year's Snooker World Champion? That is the only question remaining left to answer this season. In 24 days' time, a name will be etched into that famous trophy at the Crucible when we find out who that winner is. But before then, we've got the qualifiers to complete, and we've got 17 days of pure snooker bliss left to go through before we find out who that winner will be. The purpose of these videos is to look at all those seeded players, so those seeded from 1 to 6, guaranteed to be at the Crucible. I'm going to look at their seasons so far. I'm going to have a look at their Crucible record, because I think looking at a Crucible record is key when trying to find out who's most likely to win a World Championship. And I'm going to rate every player on a scale of 0 to 10. 0 being absolutely no chance in hell that they win, 10 being their name is etched already into that trophy. So without further ado, let's go straight into it. So we'll start at number 16, where we've got Robert Milkins, and perhaps it's a little surprising that he is in the top 16 this year. He got his way into the top 16 last season, thanks to that really huge purple patch of form he found around sort of February, March time, where he got to the semi-finals at the German Masters, and then he won the Welsh Open. So that guarantees him a top 16 ranking, and for the first time ever, he was a seed going into the Crucible. And that's something that he's maintained this season as well. But this season in general has been very, very poor. He's only got 2 quarterfinals to his name, and both of those were in invitational events, so both in the Shanghai Masters and the Champion of Champions, where he only had to win 1 match to get to the quarterfinals. If we look at his performances in ranking events, he's only managed 2 appearances at the last 16. So you could say he is a little fortunate to have held on to his top 16 seeding. When it comes to his overall World Championship record, like I say, this is his second season as a seed after being seeded last year. And last year was quite impressive. He was 7-2 down in the first round to Joe Perry. And then he turned that around in the second session to win 10-9. And then lost to Si Jiahui in the second round. Overall, he's got 9 Crucible appearances to his name. But he's only won 4 matches at the venue. And never before has he reached a quarterfinal. And unfortunately, if you're not having a great season and you don't have a great Crucible record to rely on, it's very difficult to sort of see him doing anything of note. And whilst this does feel harsh because Rob Milkins is such a lovely bloke and he's obviously very talented, I'm going to give him a 1 out of 10. I just cannot see him in any capacity winning this World Championship. 15th in the world, we've got Barry Hawkins. And Barry actually started the season outside of the top 16. But winning the European Masters right at the beginning of the season pushed him back in, and that's where he stayed ever since. The first half of the season in general was very, very strong, to be fair. On top of the win at the European Masters, he got to semi-finals at the Northern Ireland Open and the Champion of Champions, and he also got to a quarter-final at the International Championship. So he was one of the biggest players of the first half of the season, in addition to sort of Judd and O'Sullivan. He has slightly slipped off in 2024, but he still finished 8th on the one-year list to, just underline how good and how consistent he's been this season. As World Championship records go, between 2013 and 2018, he became a Crucible specialist. He was finalist in 2013, and then he reached another 4 semi-finals and a further quarter-final in that period. Easily the most consistent player at that event during that particular time. Just unfortunately for him, he could never go all the way, and he had some narrow defeats, obviously to O'Sullivan in the final. And I remember him pushing Williams really close in the semi-final as well. Looking at it since, though, he hasn't reached a quarter-final since 2018. And of course, he didn't qualify at all last year. So he also finds himself in the unenviable position of possibly playing O'Sullivan in round 2. This is, if every single seed wins their first rounds, this is what round 2 will look like. And obviously he has got himself in that section of the draw where if he wins and O'Sullivan wins, they'll both play each other in the last 16. Now, he has beaten O'Sullivan at this stage before, but we do know the standard Ronnie's producing this season. And ultimately, I think Hawkins, he's a threat. Of course, he is. But can I see him winning? I just think as soon as he plays a big name, an O'Sullivan, a Trump, an Allen, I think he might come a little bit unstuck. So predictions wise, I'm going to go for a 6 out of 10. I think he's got an outside chance, but I can't see him doing it. At seed number 14, we've got another slight surprise. We've got Tom Ford here. And his season record, this is a man who's been on tour for over 2 decades, but is easily in his most consistent spell of his entire career. And that's what has got him to the top 16. He had a good season last season, and then if we look at this season, he got to the final of the International Championship, and he has a further 3 quarterfinal appearances at the Scottish Open, the British Open, and the Wuhan Open as well. This is in addition to reaching a final and a semi-final last season. And all this means is Tom's really gone from that kind of perennial journeyman to one of the most consistent performers in the game. I think it's important to stress mentality when it comes to Tom Ford. He's definitely a player that everyone's known about for a while. He's sort of always been a top 32 player, but he's never really had it in him to go into the top 16 before. And that's been because of a fragile temperament. That's improved massively, and the results are backing that up. Going into his overall World Championship record, like Barry Hawkins, he didn't qualify last year, despite being a heavy favourite to do so. And actually, quite surprisingly, he's only qualified once out of the past 6 tournaments. So you have to feel that he'll be quite grateful to have a seeding this year. The most surprising stat of the lot for me, though, is that he has only played at the Crucible 4 times before, and he's never won a match there. And there's going to be a brand new dynamic this year. So all the time when he's qualified before, he's been a qualifier. Now he's a seed. So in effect, he's going from the hunter to the hunted. And I think he's going to have to hope that his improved temperament can serve him well this year. But unfortunately, similarly to Rob Milkins, I just can't see him challenging. He's had a better season than Milkins, undoubtedly. And so for that reason, I'm not going to give him a 1 as well. But that Crucible record does not look very great. And if he does win his first round, he's got a potential second round meeting with Judd Trump. So it does not get any easier. So as my prediction goes, I'm going to give him a 3 out of 10. At number 13, we've got our first previous world champion, and we've got John Higgins. This season has been very consistent, you have to say, and I still think that John Higgins is playing quite well. He's got 4 ranking events semi-final appearances at the English Open, the Welsh Open, the Scottish Open, and the European Masters. And he also reached the semi-finals at the Champion of Champions. So, 5 semi-finals in a season is very impressive, and obviously he got himself into the Tour Championship as well. The main problem for John Higgins, though, is problems seem to arise when he's facing a fellow top player. He's lost to Judd Trump, Mark Allen, Ronnie O'Sullivan multiple times this season. And there was a period where he got to so many finals, like I think 2 seasons ago. And he was in really strong positions in those finals. He was 8-6 up against Mark Allen and Neil Robertson. He lost both of those. He was 9-4 up against Neil Robertson at the Tour Championship final a couple of years ago. Lost that 10-9. He was been heavily ahead of Judd Trump and Ronnie O'Sullivan this season. They've both come back to beat him. I do think that there is, and it's strange to say for a man with such an amazing mentality as John Higgins, but it does feel like there is sort of a mental block when it comes to the top players. And that's potentially what's going to be his undoing at this Crucible as well. When it comes to his World Championship records, he has played at the Crucible every single year since 1995, 29 years ago. It's an incredible statistic. And obviously we'll see a similar thing for Mark Williams and O'Sullivan in part 2 as well. 4 times he's been a conqueror of the World Championship, and he has a further 4 runner-up to his name as well, including being the beaten finalist 3 times in a row between 2017 and 2019. Something impressive for John as well, as he hasn't lost a first round match since 2014. So from 2015 to 2023, he's at least won one match and at least got to the last 16. But yeah, I do really emphasise the struggles he's had against the top 16 players. And to win this World Championship, you feel like he's going to have to play at least one of them. You know, one of the big boys, one of the players that have been playing incredibly well this season, one of the players that are above him in the rankings, also around his ranking. And looking at his quarter, I think you'd have to say in the toughest quarter of the draw. You know, you've got Mark Allen, Mark Selby, Kyren Wilson. Good luck trying to get a winner out of that section. I mean, you can never bet against John Higgins, not at the World Championship, but it is just that record. It's that record against the top players. It's the fact that he throws in a miss every now and then. And I just think there is a little bit of a mental block there. So my prediction for John Higgins as a winner, for me, I'm going for a 4 out of 10. At number 12 in the rankings, we've got our first Wilson of the video, Kyren Wilson. And after a slow start to the season, Kyren Wilson has started to find a little bit of form, particularly since the turn of the year. You know, he narrowly lost to Judd Trump in the Masters when he had a really good chance to win that 6-5. And then since then, he's gone on to reach a semi-final in Germany. And he also got to a quarter-final at the World Open. And, you know, the signs there that he's potentially starting to find form at the absolute perfect time. Something else to consider is Kyren is second on the century list this season. He's made 61 centuries, which is an incredible statistic. You know, only Judd Trump has made more with 76. And what makes that even more impressive is Kyren Wilson's done very little. Like I say, he's starting to come into form. But, you know, one semi-final, one quarter-final, that's nothing in comparison to what Judd Trump has done, O'Sullivan has done, players like Zane Ander, Gary Wilson, Mark Allen have done. But he's still second. It does emphasise that fact that a century only wins you one frame. But there was a time when Kyren really didn't back himself as a century maker. But look at him now, and I think over the past 3 years, I think only Judd Trump's made more centuries than him over a 3-year period as well. So scoring has suddenly become one of his main strengths when it used to be his sort of safety and tactical play. When it comes to his crucible record, he made his debut back in 2014. He didn't make it in 2015, but he's about to make his 9th crucible appearance in a row since 2016. And in a similar fashion to Barry Hawkins, he went on a really fantastic run between 2016 and 2021. In that 5-year period, he made 3 quarterfinals, 2 semi-finals, and he also reached one other final, losing to O'Sullivan in that lockdown tournament. And when it comes to Kyren Wilson, it feels like he's in the same kind of mould as Mark Selby and John Higgins. That's not to say his game is quite at their level yet, but you know what I mean. He's got that game that's just suited for the World Championship. Obviously, he's now got the scoring ability, but he can mix it tactically. He's got a fantastic temperament. He's got a cue action that typically holds up to pressure. And yeah, the fact that he's coming into form makes him a little bit of a danger man here. You know, very strong at the crucible. Okay, the past couple of years, he's lost in the last 16. But yeah, I think, you know, like I alluded to with John Higgins, he's in a brutal section of the draw. But he's certainly a player that no one's going to want to fancy. So my prediction actually, I might be a little bit higher than a couple of other people. But out of 10, I think I'm going to give him a 7. At number 11 in the rankings, we've got Zane Ander. And I mean, what an incredible season it has been. At the start of this season, he was outside of the top 32. And now he's comfortably guaranteed himself a crucible seeding. You know, just one of the most remarkable seasons I've seen from an underdog. Finalist at the English Open. He then won the International Championship, making a 147 in that final as well. And he's also reached the final of the Players' Championship, with quarter-final appearances at the UK Championship, the World Grand Prix, and the Tour Championship. I've said it so many times this season, no one could have predicted this. If you had told me he would be doing this at the start of the season, I would have laughed at you. it's been remarkable. There was no precedent. There was no signs that this was coming. It's come completely out of left field, and it's been so impressive. He sits third on the 1 year list as well. That just emphasises how amazing this season's been. Only O'Sullivan and Trump have picked up more ranking points this season than Zhang. And it has to be one of the biggest surprise seasons we've seen from a player in a long, long while. I'm struggling to think of an underdog story that's been quite as impressive as this. World Championship rise. This is, of course, his first time as a seed. He's qualified 3 times before, in 2012, 2015 and 2016. But in all of those 3 matches, he lost. So he's still yet to get a win at the Crucible. He's got a very calm temperament, as we've seen all the way through the season. And the World Championship demands that from a player. If you're going to be successful at the World Championship, your temperament needs to be absolutely A1. And he'll obviously come here high in confidence. If you're not feeling confident after the season Zhang's had, you never will be. But whilst I do think he'll be a danger to anyone and a banana skin to the big contenders, again, it's hard to envisage him going all the way. If he does, it would just literally be the most amazing season ever achieved. To go from where he was to what he's done this season and then win a world championship, that would just have been absolutely nuts. But yeah, unfortunately, I think he'll come unstuck against the bigger players, particularly in sort of 3-session matches. So my prediction out of 10 for Zane Ander is a 4. At number 10 in the rankings is Kyren Wilson, and he is another man who is absolutely flying this season. 2 titles to his name at the Scottish Open and the Welsh Open. He also got to the semi-finals last week at the Tour Championship. And for me, Gary is now a man who is demanding attention from fans, from pundits, from journalists. No longer is he a banana skin or an underdog. I personally firmly believe that he comes to Sheffield this year as a man who could have plenty to say at the Crucible over that 17-day period. Whilst his success this season isn't quite as surprising as Zane Anders is, I don't think many would have backed him to be 10th on the 1 year list, to have won 2 titles, and just elevate his game to the standard that he is now producing. As his World Championship record is, Kyren Wilson has 4 previous Crucible appearances to his name, most notably reaching the semi-finals back in 2019, where he beat Luca Brissell, Mark Selby and Ali Carter, before losing to eventual winner Judd Trump. And he comes in, for me, as a definite outside bet, particularly after confidence-boosting performances against players like Mark Selby, Zane Ander and Ronnie O'Sullivan at the Tour Championships. Whether he can go all the way, that remains to be seen. But personally, I would not be hugely surprised if he does. And if you're looking at value for a sort of an underdog tip with the bookmakers, Kyren Wilson, I think, is your man. Prediction-wise, I'm going to go for a 6.5 out of 10. The only thing that's slightly putting me off is, we haven't seen it regularly enough at the Crucible. And I always say personally, I know Luca Brissell was an exception last year, but typically, if you haven't done it before at the World Championship, I can't back you to do it. It's not until I see you do it that I'll believe it. But that semi-final 5 years ago will give him encouragement. The season that he's had so far will give him even more encouragement. And yeah, he's going to back himself against anyone he plays. For me, Kyren Wilson, 6.5 out of 10. And now to round off part 1 of who will win the World Championship this season, we have Ali Carter, number 9 in the world. And despite not picking up any silverware, this has been one of Ali's best seasons. We said that last season, and he's backed it up again this season. He's been runner-up at the Wuhan Open and the Masters. He's reached 2 further semi-finals and another 3 further quarterfinals this season. Very, very high levels of consistency from Ali. And perhaps in a similar fashion to what I said about Tom Ford, Ali Carter's main obstacle, on the table at least, used to be his temperament. But whilst there have been some occasions where he's looked a little rattled this season, in particular sort of towards the end of that final against O'Sullivan at the Masters, he is far less likely to throw in the towel than he used to be. And that, coupled with what seems to be a more aggressive approach, he's not suddenly all-out attack, but he used to be a player that if he was faced with a difficult pot or a difficult safety, he would play the difficult safety. He would always play the percentage shots. And he still does that to an extent, but his safety shots are typically more attacking rather than containing. And if a long pot's on, he's starting to go for them and he's starting to get them. He's got a gorgeous cue action as well. I think many people, when it comes to cue actions, talk about Neil Robertson, they talk about Sean Murphy. I think Ali Carter's got an incredibly solid one as well. And highlighting again his consistency, he sits 9th on the 1 year list. A superb season, and it's just a shame that he's not been able to pick up some silverware. At the World Championship, Ali has, of course, reached 2 finals, losing both times to O'Sullivan in 2008 and 2012. And this will be Ali's 20th appearance at the Crucible, which is a very impressive milestone. And in addition to those finals, he's got to the semi-final in 2010, and he has another 3 quarterfinals to his name at the Crucible. So he does have previous of coming good on the sport's biggest stage. My only question mark really is stamina. I think Ali Carter could get a scalp or 2 over the 17 days. He's beaten Judd Trump twice, and when he plays the top boys, you can see his focus just dial up. He is in it. The question is, if he does get embroiled in a real battle, he's got a potential second round match against Sean Murphy, which would be a big scalp. If he does get embroiled in a big match and he wins it, can he then bring himself back down and centre himself for the next match? That's my only question mark. Like I say, I think he could get a scalp or 2, but can he keep it up over the 16 sessions that you have to win, to play and win, to be a world championship? That I have slight doubts over. So my prediction, I'm going middle of the road. I'm going to give him a 5. I wouldn't be entirely shocked, but I do think at some point, if he does go on a run, I think he might run out of steam. And so, that ultimately rounds off part 1 of this Who Will Win the World Championship. I think most people would think part 1 would be filled with players that aren't necessarily favourites. Those are going to be the players in part 2. But like I say, there's definitely players in form, and there's players with good Crucible pedigree. Gary Wilson, Kyren Wilson, Ali Carter, John Higgins. Players not to be underestimated, and who could have plenty to say at the World Championship this season. I'll be back in a few more days with part 2. But until then, enjoy the qualifiers. The qualifiers are intense, as they always are. The tension's only going to ramp up as we get closer to Judgment Day. I've been loving it. I've been loving the sort of 1 a.m. finishes, even though my sleeping pattern isn't loving that so much. And the 6 a.m. alarms after a 1:30 finish, those are quite tough. It's the best time of year to be a snooker fan. Keep enjoying it, and I'll catch up with you in the next video.